Hello, everybody, and welcome to Equality and Diversity in the Music Industry. And today we have Patrick with us, and we are talking about different people in the industry, representation, different communities, and how people connect and experiences. So, Patrick, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and what you do.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm from kind of small town, rural Ontario in Canada. I grew up along the St. Lawrence River and the Thousand Islands area. Kind of used to be a famous area for tourism. So kind of country boy. But I went to school. Actually, my first year of uni was in the UK, and then I came back to Canada and settled in Toronto. And I've mostly been in Toronto and back in the UK quite a bit as well. Did some work there as well. Worked for a music tech startup there and did some more schooling there. And right now, I kind of divide my time between artist management, coaching, and consulting in the music industry, and teaching at uni. So I teach actually at a business school. I teach media and entertainment management.
Fantastic. And how long have you been doing that for?
Well, so I went back to school. I always wanted to do a master's of musicology. I was very into like music history and culture in undergrad, and so I knew I always wanted to go back to school. And then I found out that at my school in Toronto, I could do a concurrent MBA and also specialize in arts, media, and entertainment management.
Yeah.
So I did this joint program, and I had already done an incubator program and had been trying to get more equipped to, be an entrepreneur or leader in the music industry. And then doing an MBA and the specialization kind of really pushed that ahead a lot, right? Gave me just the knowledge and a lot more of the insights and connections and stuff. And so I finished that in 2018. And then in 2020, the beginning of 2020, they asked me to come back to fill in for a prof who was on sabbatical. And so I just taught for that term, a couple class sections. And then I was asked to come back last year and teach another course in another program.
Yeah.
And then now I'm back kind of teaching both courses. So
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
Well done to you. So how long would you say that process has taken you? Because obviously you've done your master's. So from beginning to where you're at now, how long has that taken you to get to where you are?
Well, yeah. So doing 2 master's degrees and a graduate diploma took about 3.5 years.
Wow.
So yeah, it was a long journey and sometimes it was quite intense, but I got to start to work in the industry. So I started kind of working mostly along like project management or coaching some artists. And then when I finished, I could focus more on that and kind of took on my first artist, and he'd been writing songs and started recording them and raised a lot of money actually to record these songs. But he had started writing them like 10 years prior. So this was like a labor of love over many years. And then I helped him basically prepare to launch the album, do some big launch events, have some merchandise and even like CDs and kind of have him sort of arrive as an artist, because he was known as a creative person and a musician, but he wasn't really known as like his own artist, singer, songwriter. So that was in 2019.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I really kind of got into artist management, I would say. Yeah.
Fantastic. So talking about your own struggles and your own kind of community, how would you feel that is in Canada and coming over to the UK and then going back to Canada and obviously your education? How's that affected you and how you feel?
Yeah, I mean, so in my undergrad, I kind of alluded to this. I did music, and I was originally a performer, mostly a singer for hire. I sang in professional choirs, light opera, operetta, music theater, that kind of thing. And that's a difficult life, I'd say. And I realized I actually kind of liked more being the organizer and the person kind of behind the scenes, making it happen or helping to make it happen. So it's been, I have been blessed to have lots of training from a young age in music. And I think that the missing piece was more my interest in sort of business and organization and starting things and, developing things. That part kind of suffered because I didn't think about it. I didn't think, oh, I could actually go to business school. I could actually go somewhere to learn and get the skills. Because I think a lot of it is if you have that sort of interest, then you can thrive if if you find the right program, find the right mentors, find the right places to learn. So it took me a long time to get there. But once I got there, especially in that specialized program, I really thrived, right? And I was like, oh, this is kind of like probably where I'm meant to be. It just took a long time for me to realize that, But then once I did that, then I guess I kind of gained a reputation for, being knowledgeable and enthusiastic, and just started also like, I just loved trying to keep up with what's going on in the music industry, what's going on with rights management and like new startups, and what's going on with the streamers, and how are artists doing in this environment. And so it hasn't been easy, especially with the pandemic, right? Because I was only really going for about a year or so, a little bit more than a year, when things were then shut down. And a lot of the stuff and artists and projects and stuff that I was getting into or working on kind of just got shelved, or like it just, and I saw the toll on artists. Actually, my original artist, after doing really well for a year and streaming online weekly, decided to pack it up. It's like he was so anxious he couldn't even open up Instagram anymore.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, so I saw like I got, it was difficult for me, but it was also just, I could see it was really difficult on the artists, and then it also means they don't have as much to work with. Like, what are we doing? So I think it's really the pandemic really put things kind of on backtrack for a while, right? And a lot of the momentum that had been going on.
Yeah, it was totally lost, wasn't
it? Yeah. Especially for me, like kind of having a newer business, right? And like the first year, like they had some good successes. We had a really successful album launch and some performance dates and a mini tour and stuff like that. But then that kind of quickly,
I'm so sorry,
changed. So, but now I'm to be a more positive note.
Well, you've learned, haven't you? You've
learned. Yeah. And last year we kind of gradually, I think, started getting back more of those wins and getting back more momentum. So
that's great to hear. Fantastic. So if you was to give some advice to someone coming into the industry who's gone through the same path as what you've been through yourself, and you're going through it, you've kind of conquered, what advice would that be?
Well, it definitely takes perseverance. I think you do it, like, don't do it unless you really love it, right?
Yeah.
If you're passionate about it and you want to keep showing up at these events and supporting other artists and finding people and meeting people and collaborating with people, then I think it's great. But as long as you're finding that kind of thing, even just the process of like writing songs or putting up clips of yourself singing online or going out to singer-songwriter nights or things like that, if that really feeds you and that you just get a lot of fulfillment from that, then just keep doing that, and just keep kind of persevering, because it's it often it takes just kind of sticking with it, I think. And then if you don't, I think sometimes you realize, like myself, like I didn't enjoy the performance part all the time. There's a lot of it I didn't like at times. So then I realized, there's other stuff I can do, even though I'm passionate about this and I love this and I can't get away from music, live music or writing music or new music or whatever. I can't get away from it, but there's other roles for me, right?
Exactly. And I really get that from you. I think get consistency. I think education is key. but you also talk about networking and collaborations. Touch on
Yeah.
that a little bit more about how important that is and how that's kind of helped you.
Well, yeah, to be honest, really in the past, especially over the pandemic and kind of like online communities, and like I've been involved quite a bit in MMF Canada
Yeah.
and some of the other organizations, most of them kind of based here, but often with connections elsewhere. Um, that has been just really helpful getting to know other people. And then for me has been just getting sharing information, getting to support other managers. And I think that's something that's kind of not always like thought about, but managers are often working by themselves, or they have small companies. It's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we're often sharing a lot of similar struggles or issues or questions, trying to figure out similar things. And I think for me, it's been great to get to know sort of some of the other managers, and some have kind of taken on a bit of like a mentorship role and be able to say, yeah, like, let me give you some information and insight into this, or like, yes, you could do this, and then myself can like sometimes say, oh, like maybe, there's a good fit, for this artist and this producer, these people can write together or work together and could maybe make something really beautiful. And then sometimes too, like maybe we can just support one another and saying, I'd love to show up for your events for when you have really important stuff, and I'll be there and I'll try to bring somebody with me. And yeah, kind of, because like I think for the most part, maybe sometimes it kind of feels like we're kind of competing because we're trying to get our artists, maybe sometimes in similar spots or whatever. But I think for the most part, it doesn't really work like that. It's like we're all trying to develop, and I'm mostly connecting with people in the indie music scene, right? So some are with indie labels, some are not, some have labels attached to their management company, and so they're kind of releasing their own artists' work. But yeah, I find it's great. Either we can find great pairings for our artists, or just ourselves as professionals, industry professionals working together.
Yeah.
And across international lines. Like I love working with artists based in the UK and Europe. And I just, one of my artists she's born and raised in Canada, but her father's from Singapore, her mother's from Finland, and she grew up going to both places and speaking Finnish. Yeah. And I found an artist that reminded me a lot of her in many ways, just a lot of like sort of the sound and the essence of, and I saw her in Sweden, showcase in Sweden. And so we just sort of had a meeting, but she's from Estonia, across from Finland. And so now just trying to create these international collaborations.
Fantastic.
And fit more of these artists together so they can help each other. And then actually when that artist comes from Estonia to Canada later this year, they'll be able to kind of build off that relationship and maybe do like a live show together. And I love seeing those sort of cross-cultural, international connections.
That's what it should be about. That's so inspirational. Thanks for sharing that with us.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about Canada and what it's like to be over there. And shout out to MMF Canada because they have been fantastic. I've been to a few of their events. They've been super supportive. And we met a Great Escape at MMF Canada events. So that was fantastic. Tell us a little bit more about Canada's been such a great hub for cultural influences across the world. People don't talk about it enough. I think in the music industry, a lot of the big superstars have actually come from Canada. Justin Bieber, Drake, example. I think Canada's always been a great example of cultural differences and influence. Tell us a little bit about your own experiences in Canada, cultural differences, influences, and how this affected you.
Yeah, well, I think we can't. A lot of Canada is, in our cultural policy and, even our culture and our artists and music is affected obviously a lot by the US, right? Because we're so close, and there isn't the language barrier in most of Canada. And often it's kind of a joke that Canadians can sort of pass off as Americans, which is good in a way that I think sometimes it's easier for us to kind of enter the American market, and we don't seem so different in a way, right? And there is, a lot of that American culture that is sort of similar. Like I think we often have our own spin on it. We have our own influences, and we're actually a newer, younger country, right? And we have a lot of a higher proportion often of newer immigrants. Actually, like we have the highest per capita influx of immigration, right? In the last few decades, right? So it's really great especially in the bigger cities where you get all these influences. And so, things like Black music or music of Black origin take on different flavors here often, because a lot of the Black population is from the Caribbean, right? They're first or second, maybe third generation. And we get a lot more. We have a huge carnival festival in the summer. Amazing. One of the biggest, not quite as big as the one in London, but huge, right?
What's the name?
Well, it used to be called Caravana, but apparently they're not supposed to use that name anymore. But Caribbean Festival.
Okay, shout out to the Caribbean Festival in Canada, by the way. Yeah.
Huge here. It's just huge. And then we also have a long history of Black people who settled here in the 17 and 1800s, right? And so there is a long history. It's just very different. Our history, there's, and there's a long history, of course, of discrimination, and there was slavery here. Yeah. Yes, it was dismantled earlier, but there's lots of issues to unpack. And so I think the challenge for us, whether it's Black music, Black histories, or other cultures, is indigenous cultures. Yes, is realizing that there's a lot of our own stories of the communities and the cultures here, and it's not always the same as the American history and culture.
It's not, yeah.
Or the same as the British culture. There's a lot of, so a lot of it is trying to tell our own stories, and that's the communities that are here, right? And being a multicultural society, but telling it, what is it like for those communities here? And it's not the same often as elsewhere.
100%. Right? I love that. And I think that's something that's really important that people need to realize is people from Canada are trying to be unique. They've been given a voice that's generally suppressed or held under an American or an English view. And it's nice to see more of that, actually. Yeah, that's really nice.
Yeah, I think it's great too. There's a long history in the music industry of stuff that sometimes does well in Europe or the UK. It has a hard time breaking it in the US, but sometimes they try to break in Canada first. And often they'll have a hit here first, and they use it kind of a bit as a launch pad or test market, because we're kind of some of our stuff relates some of our politics or social structures or maybe a little more European or British kind of influence, but culturally we kind of seem a little more American maybe.
Yeah.
So kind of like the in-between, I think, sometimes.
Both worlds in some ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
hopefully.
That's fantastic. And I think that's amazing. And thank you for sharing that with us, because I think that's an important point. We have to make sure that Canada has a voice and Canada has representation, and it doesn't fall in under the voice of American representation. So thank you for sharing that.
Especially, I mean, realistically, a lot of the big stars, the Drakes and the Weeknd and Justin Bieber's, they do end up getting attached to the American machine, industry. But fortunately, I think what's good is that now more they're claiming that they're Canadian more. They're saying they're making sure they're still present here, right? And they're active here, right? So
brilliant. I love to hear that. So what kind of impact has that had on you and your career moving forwards? Have you found identity, suppression, marginalization, has that an impact on you?
Well, I wouldn't say so much for me directly in the music industry. I certainly, as a queer person, I don't see a lot of the industry side of things, like managers and programmers and executives always kind of reflected on the industry side. It's an issue on the, in the artist side as well. But I think, even looking at MMF Canada and their stats and other organizations, there's not a lot of representation as much on like the people behind the scenes or the people who are managing things, right? And so that's definitely an issue. I don't see it as necessarily there are a lot of barriers right now, but there's not a lot of specific resources or collectives, things like that. I do notice more as an artist manager, I'm mostly trying to, deal with these things on behalf of my artists, right?
Yeah.
So the two main artists I work with right now are both women of color. Amazing. And, have at times, had struggled, to feel comfortable or have had sometimes people in the industry who have not treated them well.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Or maybe listened well enough. I don't know. So I feel a lot of my job is to, be a buffer or to champion them or make sure that they get good resources or, and it's easier for me to be like, hey, this doesn't seem like a good situation, or let's find a better situation, right? Because, and a lot of it too is just actually, it's again on the industry side of things. It's the managers, the programmers, the agents, all that, the venues, whatever. A lot of that is saying, they want more opportunities to work with women often, like I think, or with people of color, right? And for the one that's has an Asian background, it's there is definitely there's a limited number of people in the industry to look up to, to be able to have the comfort of working with sometimes, right?
Yeah.
And even producers, like, a lot of lovely producer relationships actually with my artists, but I've, a reoccurring theme is like, well, can we get more women producers working with them, right? Because it can be hard to find, there are great women producers, but there's not enough right now. I would say like there's just so finding those spots and say, okay, let's try to work in more opportunities for you to, at least sometimes get in the studio with another woman.
Yeah. 100%. Totally agree. And that's amazing that you're doing that and that you're trying to push that agenda forward. I think we need more people doing that from all walks and different lives and parts of communities to make that impact and that positive difference. So thank you so much for sharing that and for sharing your views on not just your own experiences, but other people from underrepresented groups as well in Canada, because I think the more people understand and realize what some of these barriers and issues are, the more we can make a change and help support other people coming forward and through the industry. So what other things do you think might impact kind of equality and diversity in the industry? Do you think cultural and age differences have an impact? Do you think education and income privileges, those kind of things, do you think they all hold artists back?
For sure. I mean, there's no doubt that, and there's a lot of evidence actually, and I think there's been a few studies that have looked at this a little bit more. If you come from a wealthy background, that's often a really good indicator for you to become a big successful artist in the future, right? You have that security, you have the education, you have the family and friends often funding your initial projects.
Yeah.
Right. And something to fall back on or home that you can always return to, right? So, I mean, I didn't come from that background myself. I came from a low income background.
I don't worry.
Yeah. So I know, but, so I'm familiar with, kind of scrapping to, always kind of support yourself. I do think one thing that Canada does well, we have a pretty good social security net in some ways. There's some huge gaps in it, but particularly on the music side, we're known for having a good support for funding for artists projects.
Fantastic.
I would say part of the challenge is sometimes we have lots of different bodies that you can kind of access funds, and sometimes it can be hard to get funding from certain organizations, but then you have to try to understand and figure out, okay, where are the other programs, or what do they want, and how can I fit in? Which ones are good possibility for me, and So that can be a challenge, is like you're doing lots of applications or trying to figure out, okay, which programs do I fit in? And they're quite competitive sometimes, like I'm actually a juror for one of these organizations, Factor. And there's, of course, you get all sorts of applications coming in, but, some of them have really strong, say labels, particularly indie labels behind them, and they have good like managers and agents, like they've got a good team, or they've hired people to help them put together a really good package. So, there's a lot of good, it has, I think, there's opportunities, but there's also, there's a lot of people, with resources and who have been developing really well, who are competing for these things, right? So if you're newer, you don't have a lot of information or support, then it's hard to put a good foot forward and actually get a chance at these, right? So
great point you say there. So what's the LGBT community like in Canada?
You mean in the music industry, or?
In the music industry, sorry, I should have said that.
Well, I've noticed that there's a lot of sort of new organizations, presenters, like promoters, like putting on events and doing stuff. At least particularly here in Toronto, I think some, in Montreal and other places as well.
Yes.
I don't, so there's, and a lot of them are doing really well, like they're selling out, but these are not some of the big things, right? So we're not talking about the bigger venues. We're not talking about the bigger promotional promoter companies, right? So they're creating, I think, a really strong scene. And there's more of them happening, like there's more of these organized, like there's one of the great venues, which actually has like 3 different rooms near me. They've been having some nights called Queer Community, and they'll have like a curator host, and then they'll have a few artists, and there's things like this happening, and I think it's really great for building some momentum and opportunities. At the same time, it's not like, I don't think these are particularly big, well-established organizations, and the income that comes through these is probably also not that great. So some great stuff happening, but I don't think it's not at the point where it's
not there
it's not able to support people's career in a big way at this point. And so I think that's going to have to grow more, I think, before more artists can have actually have this
income.
Have this support their career more.
Fantastic, because it's funny, I looked at some LGBT stats, and Canada actually came #1 in the world for LGBT communities to live. So that was one of the reasons I asked, because I thought, okay, it might be one of the best communities to live in the world. However, it's one of the places for musicians that might not be the best for an income to make, because it's not as advanced maybe as some other industries.
I mean, our music market is great, but it's not at the level of the sophistication and the development of the UK or the US, right? And I notice it even like when I'm in the UK, I can tell, and a lot of it's like time and history, like where, the UK industry particularly in the 60s, the 50s and 60s exploded, and there was the British invasion, right? And the industry built up a lot. That we had no industry at that time, almost nothing here. Right. So ours only really, the small pieces of, that grew started mostly in the 70s. And then we really matured more in the 90s. But we're still not, we're still smaller and farther behind than places like the US, the UK, and probably even, Germany and France to some degree and stuff, or Japan, or, so I think, yes, there's a lot of advantages, for certain minority groups, but it also takes time too, because the industry itself, there's a lot of people that have been working in the industry for decades, right? And they might be often sort of quite good, or the allies, fairly supportive, but it takes time, I think, for a lot of this to actually spill over and become, really more, established, I guess, have a bigger presence, right?
Totally agree. I totally agree with you. And thank you so much again for sharing this, because people that from outside Canada might not understand totally how different countries are and how different industries operate, and understanding culture and understanding that we are different and we have different identities, and things are not as well established as they are in England as they are in different countries. So just understanding that and bearing that in mind, and also other artists that might be interested in collaborating as well. Think about that when it comes to Canadian artists, is giving them a voice, giving them an opportunity and a platform as well to be able to share.
Yeah. And a lot of it's grassroots. I mean, there's, especially in Toronto, been a lot of queer, Black, and Latinx artists, I think, who are doing a lot of grassroots things and create their own events, and some of them have started to really rise up a lot, and start doing more international touring and things, and also in some Indigenous artists as well have developed huge careers right now, touring the world. But often they're kind of starting in a fairly grassroots place, right?
Right. And I think it's about passion, like we said earlier, isn't it? It's about, if you really enjoy something, if you really are passionate about something, you'll find a way. You'll find a way of doing something, even if you have no money. It's about making your opportunities, isn't it?
Yeah. And a lot of it too, like I've seen a lot of them, there's a scene, and then a lot of them support one another, right? There's so many connections, like, you get to know one, and then you start to see that they're all tied together, and a lot of times they're all helping lift each other up, right?
I totally agree with you, Patrick. Thank you so much. And what kind of things would you like to see improve in the industry in the next, 12 to 18 months?
Well, certainly, I think more support for LGBTQ artists, but actually for industry people, I think too, because we're seeing it more on the stage side, the people out in front, but the people behind the scenes and them in managerial positions, particularly, I think it's important to develop more. And a lot of that's mentorship, right? That's opening people's eyes to the possibility that these are jobs and these are roles, and then making sure they get training, they get mentorship. So I would love to see a little more organization on that side, and even the existing trade organizations, professional organizations, to be able to help develop that more, right? Develop the people on the industry side who are coming from marginalized groups. And there's a lot of this happening, but there's parts of people who are more on the outside who are not being reached as much. So I'd like to see that more.
I agree with you on that one, Patrick. And also looking at the kind of boards and organizations, what do you think the diversity is like across those organizations at the moment?
Well, I mean, I think I've noticed that, there's a lot of organizations here in Canada where there have been some improvements, right, to the representation and the governance and stuff. MMF Canada is one of them in recent years, has made some of those significant shifts. But there's other organizations, and sometimes they've made progress in certain areas, like there's certain trade organizations that I can think of that are often well represented by women, but need maybe better representation in other areas. So, unfortunately, though, still, like there's a lot of work to be done still. And I think it's, the last few years have been momentum, right? So, but I think we still need to see a lot of more stuff kind of, be realized.
I think we're making steps in the right direction, but like you said, we're still not there yet. And I think, highlighting these issues will help. So thank you for joining with us all. Can I just ask if you've got any major successes or any kind of things coming up that you'd like to share with the viewers? Tell us a bit more.
Yeah, well, most of it has to do with my artists. So, I'm really excited. So, Afro-Caribbean artist I work with named Dynasty. I'd kind of known and helped support her a bit years ago, but we've kind of more formalized this recently. And she's got an incredible story. She was in and out of the shelter system for several years, and she's just so prolific. And she started taking off on TikTok last year. She opened for Sean Paul in Toronto last year. But now it's got this amazing song based on personal experience called Miscarriage. And it's a really hard-hitting song, but beautiful, but it's just so deep in so many different ways and layers. And so I'm excited to see what happens for her, particularly in the next few months, because she's kind of been sitting on a lot of stuff and had life stuff kind of been thrown at her. But her and Esther, too, the other artist I work with, ESTYR, she's been cooking up a lot of stuff, working with different artists and writing, and just some of it, one of the songs is so cool. More than one actually. I get excited mostly about my artist work.
Yeah, we'll leave all the links in the description below afterwards as well.
Yeah, so that'd be great. Yeah, and Esther's gotten some stuff in some film and television. She actually got a couple songs placed in a series called Gay Mean Girls.
Congratulations!
And it was the second season, and she got a bunch of spots in there, and she loved it. It was a lot of Asian women creators behind the series, and so for her, I think it was really a good feeling to feel like she was meeting her audience in this series, right? And then also, I guess on my side, a little bit more, I'm planning to come back to the UK for Focus Wales and The Great Escape and events in London and stuff. So I'm looking forward to meeting more people then and reuniting with people, hopefully you as well. So
yeah, we'll link up again, and definitely I'll leave your link in the description as well. So if anyone wants to get in touch with Patrick, feel free.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic to see you again. Thank you so much for taking the time out today to come on the show.
My pleasure. I'm happy to do it. Thank you so much.
That was great. Thank you.